A very good evening, a warm welcome to Dan Really Likes Wine, presented by Pick and Pay, and welcome to an ever so slightly sun-kissed Dan. A couple of days spent in Mozambique. I got back this morning after exploring Maputo, hanging out at the Southern Sun and pretty much clearing them out of fresh seafood and getting to try some really, really good wine to go with all of the Portuguese food. And you're going to see all of that in coming weeks on Dan Really Likes Wine, both the best of wine at the Southern Sun while eating a lobster thermidor that was about the length of my arm, beautifully done by Luis, the chef at the Southern Sun, and paired with some interesting wine. Who would have thought that a Merlot would go rather nicely with a lobster thermidor? So you can look out for that on the horizon, plus the chance to try my very own piri-piri sauce. I got taught how to make it by an expert Portuguese chef in Mozambique. We did some pairing with the spice of piri-piri sauce with a couple of different Portuguese wines. So a lot of fun. A big thank you to Goodbye Malaria, who took me up to Mozambique to go and spray. They've got a wonderful, wonderful project trying to put an end to malaria in Mozambique. So we did some filming there for the Nicholl show that'll be out on Supersport next month. But while I was there, I thought I might as well try a bit of food and wine. And so I jumped into Portuguese cuisine and Mozambican lifestyle very happily. And as I say, that'll be coming up in the next few weeks, a few snatches of life in the Mozambican capital. So on to this evening. And this evening is just seriously cool. Three of the most exciting young winemakers in the country. Three winemakers who've got different stories to tell. They share one very strong common thread, and that is making seriously awesome wine that is getting increasingly good reviews from all corners of the planet. All three winemakers have had Greg Sherwood, amongst others, raving about them. And so just a little later, we'll be saying hello to Samantha Suddons, finding out where the Vine Venom name came from and how her very distinctive and very cool labels came to be. We'll also be chatting to Lukas van Loggerenberg. The new Break a Leg wines are out, and finding a bit more about Lukas's story. And then the man behind the Revenge of the Crayfish, a wine at one stage I didn't think actually existed. It was so hard to find an actual bottle. You just saw all these images that you thought people had made up, but it does. I've since tried it, and it's going to be lovely to have Sakkie Mouton on the show as well. So they're coming up in just a few minutes' time on a busy Thursday on Dan Really Likes Wine. Before we do that, though, here's a little wine news for you to have a look at. Well, let's kick off with the latest Strauss auction. It goes back to 2012, a strong vintage. There is some very special wine in that auction. It ends on Monday. It is online. You've got the chance to go and see our friends at Strauss. Now, the dashing characters on screen, the one on the left is Roland Peens, and Roland in between, working with Mike Radcliffe on their wine advisors business, looks after the Strauss wine auctions. One of the wines that is up for sale is the 2012 Ruston Frieda estate, and Roland reckons that was the finest wine he drank of the 2012 vintage. So that probably means the price is going to go straight through the roof. But there are loads of other 2012 wines, not just South Africa. There's some French wine there as well. Some of Mr. Ratcliffe's own Villefonte in there. So again, do a bit of exploring. That's over at Strauss. And in and amongst the high flyers, there might be a bargain or two to be had. So that finishes off on Monday if you want to do a little bit of wine shopping. Also in the news, no, that's not Pete Goffwood, much as it might look like him. That's actually Celo Caracas, who is the chef I mentioned just a moment ago, the Portuguese chef, born in Portugal, grew up in Vanderbijl Park, born in Mozambique, grew up in Vanderbijl Park, went back to Mozambique, opened a restaurant, and now focuses on his role as a private chef, does a lot of work with Nando's. As you can see, there's not much of that food left. We demolished his trinchado. We also demolished some really cool Portuguese wine, Dois Quintas, which is available in South Africa. Portuguese wine I always find very underrated and usually extremely good value. I bought wine in the 3-4 euro category that you expect to give you heartburn when you're in Portugal, and actually turns out to be really good. So look out for those Portuguese adventures coming up, including time at the Southern Sun in Maputo. Really cool hotel, and looking forward to getting back there. Those of you, that's one of my rooms in that face, looking down across the pool over the ocean, and a super spot. So big thank you to Bruce and the team at the hotel for looking after me. And Bellingham, they're our competition this month. If you jump onto our social media channels and tell us why you would like to win the prize, you could win it. What is that prize that you might like to win? I think you'd definitely like to win it. It is dinner for 4 people at Le Coin Français in Franschhoek. It will be cooked for you by Chef Darren Badenhorst, one of Franschhoek's star attractions, and the food will be paired with vintage wine from the Bellingham range. And there is some lovely wine there. Richard Duckett, the winemaker producing it. That's going to be a cracking night out. So get on to your social media channel of choice. Tell us why that Bellingham dinner should be yours. And we look forward to giving one very lucky person a very cool prize. So there we go. That's what we have to look forward to. That's the news for this week. Make sure you enter that competition. Right, let's go into our show. And as I said, 3 really cool young winemakers who are making some really eye-catching wine that's getting a lot of attention, a lot of interest, and selling out really fast, which isn't good news for those of you who want to drink it, because none of them make that much wine. It's all in relatively small quantities, although that might change as their respective stars continue to soar. So let's say hello to our guest this evening from Venom. It is Samantha Suddons, Lukas van Loggerenberg of wines of the same name, and Sakkie Mouton, the king of the crayfish, who joins us as well. Guys, lovely to see you. Welcome to the show. And I've got to ask the first question, Samantha, the obvious one. The name, Venom, it sounds almost serpentine and slightly dangerous. Where does that come from?
Yeah, I just like the kind of visualization of like venom getting inside of your veins, much how, alcohol is kind of, intoxicating, just like a serpent venom. So the name kind of really resonated with me as this kind of bold, it's really kind of postmodern. I didn't want to do anything that was really kind of classic or kind of old school. I wanted to kind of break the boundaries a little bit. So the name it really gives people an idea that the wines are kind of something a little bit more different and something to kind of prepare themselves for as well.
It looks really cool. I'm having a look at the labels now, and I'm going to ask you about those labels in more detail in a moment. As people who have heard the answer to your first question will gather, I think she doesn't sound like she's from Stellenbosch or from Swartland or any of our normal spots. There's obviously a cosmopolitan touch to the background. Give us a little bit about the Samantha Suddons story and how you find yourself where you are today.
Yeah, I'm a real mixed bag. So I'm part Italian, part British, part Ukrainian. I've moved all over the world. I lived in America, the Netherlands, around the UK. And I actually came on holiday to South Africa whilst I was studying at university. And I fell in love with the country, and I was a bit kind of wild and rebellious, and growing up many different places, it kind of, it excited me to move to somewhere new. So basically, when I finished university, I literally moved here with a backpack. I lived at the Backpackers in Stellenbosch for 8 weeks, so I didn't really have much of a plan. I studied history of art at university. So when I moved to South Africa, I originally tried to get a job in the art industry, but that didn't pan out. And obviously, when you're living in Stellenbosch during the weekends, you're going and visiting the wine estates and tasting wines. And before I knew it, I was so interested in wine that kind of took over my passion and my interest. And then I started studying with the Cape Wine Academy and working at wineries in Stellenbosch. And that's led me to 12 years living in South Africa, now starting my own brand and my own winemaking.
It's a terrific journey, and it's great to have you in South Africa, as anyone who's drunk your wine will attest to. It hasn't been a journey without its challenges, though. Run me through Terra Cura and how that fits in to the path to where you are now with Wine Venom.
Yeah, so Terra Cura started as a concept between 3 business partners back in 2014. At the time, I was working with the Molyneux, and their winery was growing quite big. They'd moved to Franschhoek, the Molyneux, that is. And I was looking to kind of base myself in the Swartland. So I joined Terra Cura in 2015. And then basically, as time went on, I realized I really wanted to do my own thing, my own brand, my own stamp, specifically with, for example, rosé. Terra Cura, Silverfist never made a rosé, and that was a real big interest of mine, and wanting to really take inspiration from global rosés that I've tried. So eventually it just worked out that I really wanted to kind of do my own thing completely on my own. No investors, no partners, it's just me, starting small, starting humble, and building my way up. So no fancy equipment, no concrete eggs. I'm literally begging for barrels on Instagram this last week because I can't find any barrels. But yeah, I just really wanted to do my own thing completely on my own and start from scratch.
You built it up very quickly indeed. A little later in the show, we'll be trying some of those Venom wines. What about Lukas and your journey? I know you're a man from the Loire Valley is a great inspiration. I'm sure it's been one of many. What was it that got Lukas van Loggerenberg into the world of wine, first of all?
Actually, I grew up in Roosendaal, in the Breedekloof Valley, which is was and where most of the bulk wines gets produced. But there's a lot of good friends of mine that are pushing the envelope and making some really decent top-end wines. And obviously, the end consumer in Roosendaal drinks a lot of brandy and Coke. And yeah, I actually wanted to. When I grew up, I didn't grow up in a wine family and stuff, and I actually wanted to go study medicine, and then through grade 11, standard 9, I kind of realized that my mom wasn't going to be able to support my studies financially, and I decided, so I didn't go and study after school. And I went and did 2 harvests at a big co-op called Dashbosch, which is part of the Uniwines brand. And yeah, I met some unbelievable friends from the industry that are now renowned winemakers. And I went one evening with them. There was back then still this Yule thing in Stellenbosch, and we went. I went with them to Elsenburg. And a long story short, I ended up getting a scholarship at Elsenburg, and that's where the love for wine started.
You had some unusual prompting to move into the wine industry beyond just the love that you'd picked up. You had was it some knee injuries, some knee operations you had to have, and you had to try and find a way of covering the medical bills?
Yeah, so with, I think it's probably a very typical South African thing when you're a boy. You kind of have to play rugby, and obviously myself being a bigger human being, I love playing rugby and stuff. And during the university years and stuff, I had my fair share of ACL replacements, and then after Elsenburg, I went and worked at Rijks in Tilbach and had my third and last ACL replacement on my right knee. And my wife, or girlfriend back then, said, "Listen, this is now finished. I'm done with it." And took a break from sports and stuff. And then I think 6 months before we decided to do our own thing, the Van Loggerenberg wines, I had a really silly soccer accident. My good friend Renan Borgman laughs every day, every time when we recollect about the memories. But I tore my patella tendon, and it's got fixed, and I resigned from the wine estate where I was working at the time. And it was 10 minutes past 12 on 2016. There was obviously a bit of wine involved, but it wasn't a wine-induced injury. My kneecap tore in half. There was a hairline fracture on my patella and stuff, and I was freaking out because I didn't have any financial capital to have any harvest interns or stuff. It was a one-man band, and so I was there walking on crutches. And a very good friend of mine, David Sadi, in the Swartland, said, "Why don't you do some rosé that you can sell unlabeled to friends and family to help with the medical bills?" Because there was quite a huge bill at the time. And then I'll never forget the day. It was somewhere around in May, and Richard Kelly, our importer in the UK, he was the first guy to come and taste my wines out of the barrels in the cellar. And I was nervous as hell, because it was quite a big deal, and he's a master of wine and a very serious wine taster. And so being nervous, I didn't spit any of the wines that we tasted from barrel. And throughout the tasting, I thought to myself, listen, I'm going to let him taste this 2 barrels of wine. And he tasted it, and he wrote this massive note, and he said, "What are you going to do with it?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to sell it unlabeled to my friends and family." And he said, "Well, if you give it a name and a label, then I'll take half of it." And that was the birth of the Break a Leg range of wines.
So a very fortunate break there, not only inspiring the name of these wines, but also giving you an unexpected, I suppose, step in the right direction. You also, as part of the journey, a couple of harvests in America. Is that right?
Yes. While I was working at Rakes, I was never fortunate enough to go and do a harvest intern as a cellar rat overseas. And after my 3 vintages at Rakes, I kind of felt the need to, before I get married and have kids, to kind of go and work and experience overseas. And it's on the Sunday I kind of just typed on the internet international winemaking opportunities, and no kidding, within 30 minutes I was on this telephone with an American winery owner, and I got a job on the East Coast. And so my girlfriend back then, or my wife, she asked me, why do you want to go to the East Coast? For me it's not easy, but it's relatively easy if you have good fruit to make really great wine. But the best advice I've heard was that a sold wine is the world's best wine. And if there's one thing the Americans are good at, it's marketing. And so I went over for 2 vintages as a viticulturist and winemaker up on the East Coast. And the town where I was making wine was 2 hours from Manhattan. And so there were all these guys that played on Wall Street and had these unbelievable weekend homes. And these guys were obviously great wine collectors, and they were so humble in sharing it. So yeah, the wines that I've had there, I'll probably never be able to afford or get them in hand, almost like Sakkie's wines. So yeah, we had the wines that I drank there. When you drink great wines, they kind of get engraved in your memory and your palate, and I think that played a massive role to the wines that we produce today, and where the wines that we are going to produce in the future.
Wines which, along with Samantha's, we'll be trying very shortly on the show. A mention there from Lukas about the rarity of the wines of our third and final guest this evening, Sakkie Mouton. Sakkie, it's been just an extraordinary few years for you, because you certainly weren't a complete unknown, but the degree to which you suddenly became one of the most sought-after names in South African wine, with this Revenge of the Crayfish that seemed overnight gained cult status. How much did that surprise you? What was that process like, with this wine suddenly taking off and shoving you into the international wine spotlight?
Well, Dan, wow, it was a bit of a surprise, I have to say. I definitely wasn't ready for it. But I think the moment it happened, I also realized that this was the right moment for me. I was ready for it. And I think if it happened 1 year earlier, I wouldn't have been ready. If it happened 1 year later, I definitely wouldn't have been ready. So I think at that stage, I was ready for it. And yeah, it was all thanks to, Jan O'Deer, who introduced me to Greg Sherwood, and, gave me the opportunity to actually present my wine to a master of wine. For me, being a young guy, that was a major experience. I mean, I didn't have an idea what it was about at that stage. All I knew was I had a great wine, and it was from an area that I'm from and that I thought was super cool and amazing, and I wanted the world to taste it, but I only had 1 barrel. So that made it it made it tricky, and I had to kind of make a big splash with 1 barrel of wine. It was an interesting experience, and it was scary, definitely. I'm still kind of trying to just figure out which way I have to go, and try and do it as humble as possible. It was definitely. I've thought of it as one of those moments when the Beatles released an album, and like overnight, people just start they message you, and they're like, because I remember I was in bed and Ian messaged me. And he was like, listen, you have to go. It was like, I think 2 in the morning. And he's like, listen, you have to go on your emails right now. There's people, like, your life is about to change. You have to check this out. People are they're messaging you. It was a super, super interesting experience. scary but cool. Really, really cool. And I'm humbled by it, really. I'm happy. And so far, it's been a great journey. Yeah, definitely a super, super cool journey.
There was some assistance, as you say, knowing Ian, getting the connection to Greg. Greg is such a champion of South African wine, and you've been one of many beneficiaries in the South African wine community of his generosity and his support. But Greg is also somebody who knows his wine. And yes, he's enthusiastic, yes, he's supportive, but he's not going to make a fuss about wine if he doesn't feel there is a fuss that deserves to be made. What do you think it was about this wine that got his attention, and from there on the attention of so many other people in the wine world quite so quickly and quite so forcefully?
Well, Dan, I think just the fact that it's from an area that it's a bulk wine area, and it's kind of been like that forever. People have kind of pushed the area down. They've been like, yeah, you can't make great wines from this area. And I think, we've had the Swartland doing its thing for 20 years now. And I think at that stage, it was like, we're ready for something new. We're ready for something interesting. And that wine just came at that right moment when everyone was like, okay, we're looking for something new, something interesting. And I think just the freshness of that Chenin Blanc for me I think that's what caught Greg's attention. I've tasted a lot of, South African Chenins, and I love all of the examples, but I think that Chenin just has that salinity and that specific freshness that you can only find in the West Coast. And that just opened a whole new door, in my opinion, to the South African wine world, and just showing that, where I'm from, there's potential there. It just, it needs time. And I think it's the first wine, I think, that had an aging potential, because that usually was the problem with our wines. And Greg was like, listen, this thing is going to age for a very long time. And that was exactly what I was looking for. I wanted to make a wine that could age for a very long time. And that wine just had that exact, at that moment, it was that exact wine that could do that. So I think that was what made it so interesting. And till this day, talking to people, they just tell me, it's such a fresh example of Chenin. It's like, it's something completely on its own. And yeah, that's what makes it special.
What about the name? Because when I was flicking through some social media, it might have been Steve Steinfeld who had mentioned something about it, and I thought it had to be a really bad 1950s science fiction movie, The Revenge of the Crayfish. And then it turned out it was this brilliant bottle of Chenin Blanc. What inspired the name? How did you get to it?
Well, it was actually... we had a lot of weekends when I was still an assistant winemaker in Stellenbosch. We had a lot of weekends of drinking wine, me and my friends. And I think somewhere in those weekends, I don't know if it was like a drunk feud, and I was like, Revenge of the Crayfish. Just, it sounds, it's got a ring to it. And I just had to put the exact picture to it. And I'm a big Quentin Tarantino fan. So I like, I kind of like the idea of when things don't go the way that you want them to go. And I thought, just putting a crayfish on a bottle, that's West Coast, but I want to make it a bit funky. And it just came to me, this idea of a crayfish eating a person. And I decided to put my head in there. And it was quite funny because I had to take a lot of pictures of my head to send it to this artist of me looking like a crayfish is eating me. I had to do a lot of takes of that. And he completely got what I sent him. He just sent me the first example he sent me. I was like, dude, this is exactly what I had in my mind, and it just fits perfectly. It's got that kind of vintage look to it, which is, in my opinion, the West Coast. It feels like, Jan said the other day, it feels like you're 30 years in the past, and I feel exactly that's how it is. And that image is just, like you said, it's like a horror movie poster. And it's also like, it's not like anything else you can find out there. So I think that also, it just, this whole package just fitted completely into that moment. And yeah, I was very blessed with having that blessing.
Well, you've passed it on to all of us. The very few of us who've ever got to drink it. I think there were only 370 bottles made of that very first one. The numbers haven't gone up hugely since then. We speak about the label, the crayfish happily eating somebody. Samantha's labels are also very, very eye-catching. So there we go. There is the shining I'm not sure if that's Jack Nicholson inspired. We'll find out in a second. And then also the other bottle I've got here. This is the Silence. There's almost, Samantha, I get a bit of Edward Munch to this. There's a bit of a scream feel to it. They're really, really distinctive labels. I really like them. Talk me through them. Who produced them for you? Maybe you made them yourselves. What was the idea behind them?
No, I studied history of art, but I'm definitely not a good artist. And as you see behind me is the first painting that I acquired by the artist Daniel Levi. So he's a Cape Town-based artist. And right before the pandemic, he released a series of works which involved this one here. And I saw it and I just absolutely fell in love with it. So this was back before the 2020 harvest. So I had no idea about how my wines would look or any sort of visual, but I absolutely love this painting. And it kind of stuck with me for quite a while, and harvest happened, and then you're just in such a whirl with harvest, you're not really thinking about much else. And then boom, the 2020 pandemic happened, and you start looking around at your empty walls and you start thinking, I need something in the room to brighten it up. And that painting just came to mind, and I basically messaged him and said, I really love this painting. I'd actually love to put it on a sparkling wine that I've got coming out in a couple of months. Would you be interested in maybe collabing and producing some paintings for me for the rest of the wines that I'd want to produce and release? Because obviously I wanted the wines to have a series and look part of a catalog. Again, the art influence kind of still comes through with me there. So Daniel was very excited about it. You never know how artists are going to be, if they're going to be, oh, my painting isn't for a wine label, it's supposed to be on a gallery wall. But he was really excited, and basically I just gave him some Pantone. So if you look at the back of the label, the Pantone color of the back labels is all that I gave Daniel, and then he came up with the paintings. So it's quite uncanny. I mean, with Silence, that's the floor wine. So in my mind, it's this kind of gray, really dark, very moody, you know, the barrels are very dark and under this veil of silence, and that's where it gets its name from. So he interpreted the colors absolutely amazingly. I only saw the paintings when they were done, and I went to go and collect them. So I couldn't be happy with them. And with the influence, I'm actually really influenced by Francis Bacon's art, but his artwork can be a bit intense. So Daniel's work is a little bit more kind of palatable, excuse the pun.
Touche, Samantha. So it sounds like as an accident, twist of fate, they came back as paintings that really speak to your interpretation of the wine, and that they come together really well.
Yeah, I knew with the labels that, you know, because I don't own a wine estate, there's no Cape Dutch buildings, there's no pretty vineyards to put on the labels. Also, I'm not from South Africa, so there's no kind of heritage or kind of link in that sense to family heritage. So again, with the name being Vine Venom, I really wanted the labels to kind of look postmodern, a little bit different. Honestly, it's very love or hate. You know, you get a lot of people who really enjoy the labels, a lot of people who think it looks like an ink blot test, but there you go. But that's what I like, is to challenge people. You know, I didn't want to make something that was easy, and especially with the rosé, you know, it would be so typical to go down the pretty rosé angle and have a lovely, you know, floral or diamond, you know, label. But I wanted to go something really extreme, really out there and very bold. Yeah.
The results are very, very much there to see. You were a rather late entry into the world of wine, as you've said, as I'm guessing there were plenty of people who helped you along the journey, not just collaborating with labels and helping out with art, but also in the more fundamental process of making the wine. And in fact, you've got a reasonably close relationship with Sakkie. Do you guys make your wine in the same cellar?
Yeah, it's quite funny because we actually only met for the first time the other day, but our barrels are like literally next to each other, and we're in the same cellar space. So we're constantly like ships in the night, you know, we're doing different things. I pick a lot of my fruit extremely early. So I just moved into this winery this year. So previous vintages, I made at another winery. So yeah, if I ever have any questions, at least Sakkie's right next door and I can just pop over and ask him.
You've also found yourself in a wine community that we have here in South Africa that I find consistently is extremely supportive and extremely engaging. And there's no very little sense of jealousy of other people's success or guarding stuff, not sharing with people. Has that been your experience as you've become a member of this wine community here in South Africa?
Well, absolutely. I think, especially for someone like myself, I don't have a BSc in agriculture or viticulture. I never studied this at university. It's not a science degree or even sort of a practical degree that I have. The way that I've learned is through watching people, being welcomed into people's cellars and tasting all the wines that people are so generously giving you and tasting. And that's basically the one thing that inspired my rosé, was actually tasting wine and working backwards. And it's not through sort of a scientific approach. It's being exposed to so much wine and also so much information. And as you said, like right before harvest, I'm sending winemakers in the Swartland messages asking for advice. And there's a lot of help as well when you need equipment or, somewhere to store a barrel here or there every now and then. So it's a very open community. And I think that's really helped with learning things. And that's why I'm also pretty open about what I'm doing. I share a lot of photos on social media of behind the scenes of what the floors look like. Because I know, for example, it's really difficult to see what's happening in the Jura with their floors or in Sherry. It's all this very secretive and kind of closed off society. And I didn't want it to be like that for other people, because, sharing is information and it's so much more enlightening for people and exciting too.
And we all benefit as those of us who drink the wine that together everybody makes in South Africa. It's such a cool group of people. And those relationships are so important. You've got one that's particularly important though, Lukas, because although your name is on the wine, I think there might be somebody who's a little more, should we say, a little more influential, has a slightly firmer hand on the tiller when it comes to Lukas van Loggerenberg wines. Tell me about a lady called Roxanne.
Yeah, it's. I think I wouldn't have been here if it's for my wife, Roxanne. So when I moved back from the States, we moved into a place in Poland. My wife is more in the financial industry, a degree and stuff. So she had a fantastic job, and then I had this epiphany moment in the Loire Valley at Domaine de la Chevalerie, and I said in Afrikaans while the winemaker was pouring this unbelievable wine. I said in Afrikaans, "Listen, I'm going to resign when I get back home." And then obviously it's quite nerve-wracking because I didn't have any financial backing, and she resigned her job, and we moved to Stellenbosch, and so a lot of the wines that we do on the collage effect on our labels, a lot of it pays tribute to her. And then I think Draft, our single vineyard Syrah from the Polkedry, is that drafting of two things working together. So yeah, she has a massive inspiration, and especially with the Breaker Leg wines, the two new editions, the Chardonnay and the Merlot, she had a massive role in that.
A terrific influence, clearly, and a big part of the Lukas van Loggerenberg wines story. You mentioned there the Loire. I know one of your wines is actually called Breton, and straight away you see Breton and Loire, and Cabernet Franc. Getting there, discovering the Loire, realizing what an impact it was having on you. What was that experience like in terms of forming who Lukas is today as a winemaker?
Yeah, so in 2016, when we did the first Breton, I only did, I think, the amount that Sakkie is doing of his crayfish wines was two or three barrels, and Richard Kelly had a massive tribute to the name Breton because I think he's probably one of the world's most leading Loire experts. And we tasted the wine. I think Thierry Germain is one of my winemaking idols from the Loire Valley, and he does this cuvee called Les Mémoires, which is a blend of his old 100-year-plus vineyards that he does 100% whole bunch. And I'll never forget the first time I went to the UK to show my own wines, which was a humbling experience. I was standing there with the 16 Breton, and the late, great Stephen Spurrier came around the afternoon, and it was around 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, and I was a bit tipsy tasting everyone's wine and not eating the whole show. And he tasted through our wines, back then we only did 4 wines. And he tasted through the wines being silent because there's a few people around him. And he put his hand on my shoulder and he asked me if I would walk away with him. And I thought to myself, damn, I probably poured him a corked wine. And I think 5 meters away from my stand, he said to me, "Thank you." And I said, "For what, sir?" And he said, "This Breton reminds me of what the Loire tasted like in the 70s. And funny enough, Greg Sherwood was close by, so he overheard the story, and that was for me kind of, I think when you start your own venture, which is quite nerve-wracking, that vote of confidence from someone that's been in the industry for decades massively played a massive role. And especially with our two Shannons that we do, we try and focus on showcasing proper Shannon characters without over-oaking them or picking them too ripe, showing that beautiful energy that South African Shannons have.
Yeah, that sort of comment from Stephen Spurrier is fantastic. But as I said with the Greg Sherwood comments on the Revenge of the Crayfish earlier, it's not a comment that's going to be dished out without some genuine reason for doing so. So rightly proud of yourself to be there after getting that sort of adoration. And many have since followed. I've had a few messages coming through, people asking about that Revenge of the Crayfish label. I think we've actually got a picture of it, which we can throw up. The Revenge of the Crayfish. So there we go. Now that is an unsuspecting sod about to be devoured by a giant crayfish. It really does have an old sci-fi B-movie type feel to it, but it sits really, really nicely. If I go back, Sakkie, when this kicked off, was that first one non-vintage? Was that right?
Yeah, so Dan, so the first one I made at the winery where I worked at back in the day in Stellenbosch, and I wasn't actually allowed to make my own wine there, and I decided I'm going to make one barrel because they allowed me to make one barrel. I was not allowed to certify it, and so I decided, you know what, I'm going to make this barrel and I'll see what happens. And in the end, I went through with the whole process of getting the labels designed, and I was serious about it. But I think, you know, the owners of the farm was more like they thought maybe I was going to, you know, just make a wine for my friends. But as the wine progressed in the barrel, I started realizing that, you know, this is really something special. And so I got the label printed, I got everything ready, and that's why it was a non-vintage, it was uncertified. And yeah, basically I was selling an illegal wine, so to say. But yeah, from there on, the second vintage, the 2019 was also non-vintage, but it was just an uncertified wine. But the 2018 was, yeah, that was not. It didn't go through any legal paths. I basically just had to. I just knew I had to do it at that stage. It was just, yeah, I had to get the wine out there. But yeah, from now on, it's all certified and it's got its little wine of origin sticker on it and everything. Yeah.
Sakkie the wine maverick, doing things his own way and having great success at it. It's not surprising at all that you're in the wine world because it flows in the blood. Growing up with the family in Frindal, with wine being what the family did, was there ever any doubt that winemaking would be your chosen path?
No, so actually, yeah, I grew up on a wine farm, but we don't have a winery. My dad takes all the grapes to the co-op. So I never had the opportunity to make wine. And I actually wanted to go and study in sound engineering because I love music. And yeah, that was basically what I was interested in. And my dad just said, there's no way, you know, where would the farm go if there's, you know, I'm the only son in the family. So where would the farm go? And I wasn't interested at that stage in going back to the farm. You know, I was actually, like I said, I was interested in going out into the world. And so, yeah, he said, go to Elsenburg, you know, just get like a degree or a diploma or just get something in agriculture. And after that, you can actually go on and do whatever you want. And so I went to Elsenburg and I saw the cellar students. They were kind of the outsiders. They always wore their gumboots and they were like walking around very, very cool. And I just knew this is like kind of the group of people that I would like to hang out with. You know, some of the guys had long hair and they were a bit weirder than the rest of the agriculture students. And I just knew this was where I had to be. And yeah, that's where I ended up actually the first time, you know, making a wine or actually digging deeper into viticulture than I was used to, because that's the sad thing, you know, in the co-op industry, basically your life with your grapes ends the day you dump them into the harvest machine, and that's where it ends, you know. From there on, there's nothing else. And I couldn't do that. I just couldn't see. I just had to take it further than that. So yeah, that was basically, and I went traveling after Elsenburg. I did a lot of different jobs, all in the wine industry, but I did harvests all over the world and kind of just fused this idea of what I wanted to do, fused it together until, you know, the Revenge of the Crayfish. So yeah, it was coming a long time.
Coming a long time, going very quickly because it sells out so fast, which leads to Mark Shepton's question. I'm not sure if you can answer this, Sakkie. Where can we buy the Revenge of the Crayfish? Looking on the web, but can't find it anywhere. Mark, it's probably easier at the moment to get hold of the Crown Jewels for a weekend of loan than to find a Revenge of the Crayfish. Sakkie, is there any of the original left, and what's the status on the later vintages?
Yeah, so the 2020 is also, that was the last vintage that was released, and that's all sold out. The 2021, I'm not sure when exactly I'm going to release that. Yeah, I'm trying to get more and more bottle aging time on the wine before releasing it. So yeah, I'm not too sure when that will come out, but I've got an email address that I usually give to people and just tell them, you know, send me an email and I'll put you on the list. And obviously, I am growing and my brand is growing, so there will come a time when there will be more crayfish available, and definitely I will be able to sell some more of it.
All right, we'll talk about the wine in slightly more detail in a second. We are now, geez, we're 40 minutes into the show. How fast does it go when you've got cool guests? Let's jump back to Samantha, whose wine has been looking to bite me for the last little while. We've got two of them here. The first of them is The Silence. Give me the story behind the name. And then with this 100% Chenin Blanc, why the wine stands out for you, Samantha.
Yeah, so the name, as I briefly mentioned earlier, is aged. The wine is aged under a floor yeast, and the floor yeast basically seals off the wine. So you leave the barrel with a headspace, so you fill it about 2/3 full, and then you get this naturally occurring yeast that grows on top of the barrel, on top of the wine. So I just want to say that I don't inoculate anything. I didn't even know you could inoculate for floor yeast until somebody asked me if I did this. It's completely naturally occurring. I just leave the barrels, and within at least 8 weeks, there's a floor yeast that grows on top of it. So visually, it just looks like this wine is like under this veil of silence, under a blanket of silence. The wine underneath is dark. It's kind of shut off from the world, and that's where the name Silence came from. It felt like a bit of a vacuum where this wine is just kind of in its own little world, in its own bubble, separated from the rest of us under this floor yeast.
It's a technique that is very specific. What was the thinking behind deciding this is how I'd like to make my wine?
I was really fascinated by fleur from previous experience at wineries and seeing it grow and just tasting the wines. And it gives this kind of dynamic to the wine that you don't really get without the fleur yeast. So you get a very salty, mineral, very umami flavor to the wine. And I'm not really one for overly fruity, kind of tropical flavor Chenin Blancs. So for me, this was like a godsend that, you know, I could have fleur yeast grow on the wines, and it gave the wine a more kind of savory, salty vibe to the wine. And for food pairing, it's just fantastic as well. So the fleur yeast also fascinated me because it was something that was completely out of my control. As I mentioned earlier, because I'm not a technical winemaker, I never studied it. I'm very fascinated with kind of how far you can push a wine, how you can see things develop and change and grow. And almost working backwards from tasting wines, I thought, well, I want to make a wine that is a little bit more salty or edgy, or, you know, has this flavor of this green olive. So how do I, you know, get to that point? And the fleur yeast was like the obvious decision to work with that. And just for my own taste, you know, I love to drink Fino Sherry. I love wines from the Jura as well. And I love oxidative wines with a little bit more weight and opulence too. So it kind of harmonized together in this whole project with the Silence.
Well, it's a project that I am going to happily climb into. Ooh, yeah, all those lovely savoury flavours you speak to. It's a style of wine that I'm very happy to say, perhaps not always made in this particular manner, but a broader style of white wine that we're seeing a bit more of, and it creates something, especially if, like me, you'd have 8 meals a day if you could, lends itself to the world of food so brilliantly. The most striking note for this wine for you, what really sets it apart?
It's almost like a molten salt, like a green olive and molten salt. I love both of those flavors. So maybe it's because I have a lot of olives at home. I live in the Swartland, so it's olive, heaven here. So, but that for me is the main characteristic that comes out in this wine. And the flavors that I've maybe described might intimidate a lot of people. But for me, it was always the kind of mission to make a wine that would be easily drinkable by anyone, and maybe the floor yeast you wouldn't even know about or you wouldn't even discuss, and you could still enjoy the wine. So it's by no means an extremely geeky or weird wine. It's just that it adds a little bit of interest, a little bit of intrigue. I always want it to be a wine that everyone can just kind of drink and enjoy straight away without it being too strange.
I love the mention of green olives, particularly having married into a Greek family where we have olives at least twice a day, and green olives with this. I might try some once the show is done. Let's head over to the other. This is an interesting choice for you, Rosé. You've gone with a combination here of Carignan, which we don't see a huge amount of in South Africa, with some Touriga Nacional for a bit of Portuguese flair. Why these, and what do we get as a result?
So with the Shining, I was really inspired by Spanish Rioja Rosé. And originally I wanted to work with Tempranillo and Grenache, but obviously coming into the Swartland, I live here, but getting those grapes is absolutely impossible unless you want to spend big money or work with old vines. So I had to be realistic about what I was able to get. And the farmer that I work with, she said to me, well, why don't you take Carignan, it's Provence, Rosé, and also Touriga, which is Portuguese, and you'll probably end up somewhere in the middle with the Spanish-inspired Rosé that you're looking for. So again, it's almost working backwards from the wine that I'm tasting and the inspiration and figuring out, what I can work with and what I can get access to. And the Carignan is some fantastic bush vines on the Paardeberg, and the Touriga also on the Paardeberg. So I get all of my grapes from the same farm. But together, it really brings together this harmony that the Carignan is spice. It's really cloves, cinnamon, cherries, but the Touriga is now the fruit, the kind of strawberry, the punchy, the weight. So together, I'm really happy. The wine was exactly 50-50 of the two grapes, so 4 barrels, 2 barrels of each. One of the Carignan was in an American oak barrel, so that adds a little bit more of that kind of bourbon spice, that vanilla, that kind of musky note to the wine, which I really love. All old oak, so it's very subtle hints, but it does play a part in the inspiration from Rioja with them using American oak, and obviously me bringing that into the Shining and using that in my rosé as well.
There we go. The lovely big bold colour to that as well. A lot of the rosé I've been drinking of late has been very subtle, very understated. This has got a bit more bounce to it, a little bit more noise to it. And I think it works really nicely as a result. So we have the Silence, and then we have Jack Nicholson's favourite wine, The Shining. That's two from Samantha. Lukas, your Break and Lagrange. We've got the three of them. I did get to taste them very briefly at Embark a few weeks ago. One of the ex-Animo team was round, and I got to gate crash. I'd invited a wine tasting, did so very, very happily. Let's have a quick look at the three. I'm starting off with the Chardonnay. Give me an introduction, if you will, Mr. van Loggerenberg.
Yeah, so in 2019 in the winter, we went on a long weekend with David Clark from ex-Animo, who does amazing for us, and a good friend, Chris Allight Bucci, and their family. And my wife always gives me trouble that we never get to drink our wines. And then we were having, obviously, a few wines around the fireplace, and we kind of decided to expand the Break a Leg family, because we're really blessed that our wines find home quite quickly, and we wanted to expand our footprint in the SA local market. And it was clear from the onset that we wanted to add 2 screw cap wines. And we had the Blanc de Noir that's been doing really well for us. And so it was a white and a red. And I love Chablis, especially Petit Chablis, unoaked Chardonnay. And I think there's this big stereotype where a lot of people, when they hear the word Chardonnay, and especially Stellenbosch Chardonnay, they expect it to be oak and buttery. And we stay on a good friend Dani Kerinus' farm in the Polkadraai, which has unbelievable granitic soils. And so we source some Chardonnay from there. And those granitic soils always gives these wines this beautiful match-struck reduction, which I love on Chardonnay. And yeah, 50% of the 21 vintage with the success we had with the 2020 release, which was the maiden release. I was looking for a bit more in the middle of the wine, and a very good friend of him, Nicholl, they farm in the Devon Valley, which has this beautiful clay-rich soils. And clay soils on white wines and red wines, but especially on Chardonnay, gives this beautiful weight on the middle of the wine. And so, yeah, it's 50-50 from the Polkadrai and the rest from Devon Valley. We left the wine for 8 months on its lease in stainless steel, and it's a wine that's fresh. It's a wine that you have as an aperitif when your friends come over for a braai, and it focuses. I want to showcase more that citric aspect that Chardonnay has, and it's a bottle, and especially if I don't envy you guys to be here in Paarl with me, where our cellar is, but these bottles disappear quite quickly in the heat that we have at the moment.
All to keep healthy and hydrated, so most important. If you're not a fan of loads and loads of oak in your Chardonnay, not everybody is, then this is a style that will definitely appeal to you. We've had one rosé on the show in the form of Samantha's Shining. This one is very different. Your Blanc de Noir. As for people who are watching, from a purely technical term, is there a difference between a rosé and Blanc de Noir? And if so, what is it?
Yeah, I'm quite a purist when it comes to this. We drink in our household a lot of pink wine, if I can call it that. So Blanc de Noir, basically in French, is just a white wine from red grapes. Where rosé, when people label their stuff rosé, they could have added white wine juice with that. So it might be confusing too, but where we sell most of our Blanc de Noirs, the people understand the terminology. And funny enough, when we started with 2016 with the Blanc de Noir, I'll never forget the moment we were at the Swartland Revolution, and it was pretty late the evening, and I had a few glasses with Evan Sadi, and he said, kind of, listen, if you need anything for your new venture, your business, let me know. And I said, obviously, I'm in short of barrels. And the next morning, with Babalas and everything, he sent me a WhatsApp and he said, listen, just remind me on Monday that about the barrels, and he gave me some proper barrels. And I thought to myself, if I'm going to do this rosé, I have this thing that our country is blessed with probably the most diverse and multiple cultures in the world. The only culture that we lack is a rosé culture or a pink wine culture, where when I was brought up, and still today, a lot of people think of rosé being a byproduct from the cellar. It's sweet or it's cheap. So this is a vineyard that's 30 years old. It's planted in 92. So this year it's 30 years old, and there's not a lot of winemakers that farm a 30-year-old Cinsault vineyard for just making a pink wine. And yeah, it's fantastic. It's very close to the ocean. It's planted on this decomposed granitic soils. There's always this cool breeze blowing over this vineyard. And this wine that characterizes for me every vintage is the salinity on it. And this with seafood, just plain oysters with nothing on it, always does the trick.
You're having me getting visions of Mozambique over the last couple of days, where this would have been a very welcome companion, since so already with that delightful lightness of touch. So I think you can imagine exactly where this Blanc de Noir, not rosé, is headed. Just quickly, I see a couple of comments from Reginald Peck. You guys are just nursing my soul with your master skills. And I say this with pride that you're simply the best, all the way from the Plettenberg Bay Liz McGrath collection. Tons of love and support. Cheers. And a follow-up there from Reginald to Samantha. Samantha, you like the grapes where I left my heart in Spain. Thanks, Reggie. And now down in Plet, having left the Kruger, doing some wonderful sommelier work there. One last wine very quickly. I think we've got some load shedding coming up at 6 o'clock. So just 30 seconds for me, Lukas, on the Merlot.
Merlot, there was, not, the Merlot was basically just pure out of drinking enjoyment. I wanted to give the end consumer unbelievable Stellenbosch Merlot at a price that fits their wallet. So this is probably some of our most expensive grapes that goes into one of our most affordable wines. But I wanted to over-deliver because I think there's this massive understating thing about Merlot. Our Merlot is right below Keermond in the Upper Blauwklippen, planted on clay soils. It's savory, it's fresh, it has crispy tannins, and it's a wine that offers you unbelievable value for your money.
Which so much of wine from this part of the world does. But this doesn't just add value for money, it adds a really, really good bottle of wine as well. Last one, let's get back to Sakkie just to wrap up. Sakkie, I would be drinking your Revenge of the Crayfish. Unfortunately, it is just not possible to find any. So I know I'm down for 1.5 bottles of the 2028 vintage, which I shall wait patiently for. How much of a challenge is it for you now that you've exploded onto the wine scene with this absolute rock star of a wine to now build on that brand and to deliver on what are some fairly hefty expectations of you?
Well, Dan, it's, you see, I have to, right now I'm at the stage where I obviously have to make a little more, but still keep the quality. So for me, I think at the moment, that's the biggest challenge, is just, keeping the quality and still being able to produce a little more and a little more every year. The fact is that I'm making wine 300 kilometers from my home is, the drive, it's hectic, but I'll be able to do it. And I think the vineyards are getting better and better every year. I'm spending a lot more time in the vineyards, and I think the crayfish is just going to get better every year. That's my expectation of it.
Well, there'll be a lot of people waiting to see and to give that the acid test. Guys, I can't believe an hour has vanished already. It's been a delight having all of you on. I'm going to have you back again soon, possibly Sakkie, when that next crayfish arrives. Lukas, we've got plenty more of your wines to try. There's a Serenade in particular, Samantha, that I need to get hold of and have a crack at. But thank you. You've all clearly got so much passion. You have so much fun with what you do, and the wine that you produce is brilliant. And different stories, but same similar result is making lovely South African wine. So thank you to all of you. Really appreciate the time for being on the show.
Thank you, Dan.
You're back again soon.
Great.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Sakkie. Dankie, Samantha.
Bye, Dan. Bye, guys. Bye-bye.
So there we go. Vine Venom, Samantha Suddons, Lukas van Loggerenberg of Lukas van Loggerenberg, and Sakkie Mouton, the man behind Revenge of the Crayfish, amongst other wines. And there are more. It's not just one wine. He's got some other great ones emerging, and to keep a very firm eye on where he's going, where the others are going on this particular wine journey. Look out this week, our magazine show, if you haven't seen it already. There's some Brandewijn being drunk down in Soweto with Winnie Bowman. Took me about 2 days to recover from that, but it was a great deal of fun. And we also tried out some steak with white wine with rosé. Did it work? Well, the local Grill House. The Grill House was our venue for it. Saul and his team at the Grill House. You can be your own judge. There's stuff to come from Mozambique on the horizon. We've got some cool stuff with the Ex Animo team ahead of their Indaba. There's a lot of very exciting wine on the horizon. But then that's no real surprise, because we do live in the country that delivers the most awesome wine in the world. Enjoy the rest of your Thursday, and I will see you back on the show live on Monday evening, 5 o'clock. Until then, goodbye. To join the Pick and Pay Wine Club, simply SMS your smart shopper number to 36775. It's absolutely free, and you'll get for yourself 3 times the smart shopper points on every bottle of wine bought. You'll also get a 20% discount on 10 different wines each month, a 25% discount on a case of wine, and a Magnum, some terrific competitions and invitations to awesome events.